government tell us the worst thing that can happen to an individual is have a state or a corporation take their data.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
What about that data being released to everyone they know? We tell you that the use of hacking for protest allows the development and spread of technologies which allow for much more dangerous use of hacking. We think that's bad, and that's one of the grounds for opposing. In this speech, 2 grounds. Firstly, a principle of why we disagree with hacking as a method, and secondly, why there are practical harms to this, including the norm of cyber hacking and cyber warfare, and also to do with why important organisations can't get it online and can't get online and spread that.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
But let's note that the majority of cases here aren't cases where corporations have data that they've taken without consent. We think that if they have taken that data without consent, that is a matter for the government to investigate. We think that often, in cases of websites and algorithms, that's to do with people consenting to cookies. That's to do with people not reading terms and conditions. That's not really the debate. In cases, we think the majority of cases in these where people are hacked in the form of protest, as a form of protest, we think that the majority of cases are controversial cases where people with opposing views meet online, and people decide they want to take down the site of a cause that they vehemently disagree with. And we think that that is where this debate really takes place, rather than with private corporations and people wanting to seize back or destroy their data. So, on the first point, the principle of hacking, why it's illegitimate. We think that hacking is, in this situation, essentially destroys or loses the access, no thank you, to information that is owned by a private entity or by the state. We think, in that sense, this information is pretty much indistinguishable principally from property.
This is a demonstration of
Wirecast. We disagree with destruction of property because there is a loss of value, but also because that property represents a personal attribute and a sense of personal expression. This can be whether it is an individual's data that is being hacked as a form of protest, or whether it is a corporation. We think that when you go onto a website, for instance Planned Parenthood's website, and destroy their information because you disagree with that cause, then that is stopping them from expressing those ideas. And we think that unless they are willing to say that if in the cases of disagreement, they would allow people to destroy people's property, they have no real case to say they would be allowed to hack their websites. That is our principle. We think that vigilante justice is unjustified. We think if these sites are spreading illegal material, then that is something for the state to deal with, because that is something they can put their resources towards. We think if it's not, then there are better methods for trying to counteract this. There can be online discussion, but that discussion can only take place and is better for the information being there in order for it to take place. So we think that on a principled ground, vigilantism is essentially the destruction of property, and we would not stand for that.
This is a demonstration
of
Wirecast.
No matter whether it is for protest or not. Yes.
What method of protest or getting attention or whatever do you think a person should use, if not this?
We think there are lots of ways in which protest movements mobilise. We think that individuals go through charities, they go through social media, they send out viral videos, they spread information that way. We don't think that they need to hack people specifically in order to protest. Because no, there is a difference between hacking as a method of protest or a form of protest and hacking as a method of protest in order to get information to spread. We don't think either is legitimate, but we think this debate is specifically about destroying information that is online as a protest. That's why we think that it's illegitimate to destroy online sites in the same way it's illegitimate to destroy property. Secondly, on practical harms to this. So the first harm to that is that there are important organisations which are most at risk of being targeted by this. No matter how much they try to dedicate resources to technology, there will be a point at which it is not safe for them to be online, because information that they store online is likely to be accessed and potentially spread elsewhere. We think that when they have to weigh up the cost of having an extensive online presence where they can spread information against the cost of having to deal with that security and continually up it as technology gets better in order to hack and destroy that information, and they have to continually load backups onto the website and continually engage in this fight, then we think that their capacity to operate online and to facilitate general democratic debates about the topics they're talking about is massively decreased. And we think that that means that you're not able to get the discussion that we want online between opposing views, and we're not able to have that discussion. Secondly, on this point, we think that this spreads a norm of cyber warfare. And to be honest, this was alluded to in Opening Government, because Opening Government tell us that this is a really democratic form of protest, because lots of individuals are able to access technology in order to destroy information online. Let's take that to be true. We think that it is probably true that technology is more and more accessible and information is spread over the deep web as to how to destroy websites, as to take down information. We think that at the point at which people start hacking websites, when they start hacking websites then, and they spread the method used to hack those websites, they glorify that method of protesting. They glorify it and they spread the technologies that are successful in doing so. Now, there is an arms race between private companies and between hackers, but we think that as technologies continue to improve and there are discussion forums as to how to hack these, then we think that information is available on the internet. It's shared via leaks, it's shared via people boasting about how they have managed to destroy websites. That's important because that technology is just completely transferable in lots of situations to other firms. We don't think that people hackers are necessarily well-intentioned. Even if someone has spread technology because they have used it as a means to protest, that doesn't mean that that technology is going to be used well elsewhere. We think that this means when technology discovered is built upon and used by people for other ends, then it means that information on the internet is essentially not safe. Firms which don't invest massively in technology to stop that are able to have their information stolen, and firms that do are able to anyway in many cases. We think that's bad, well, firstly because of communication, because this is a method for them to express.
This is a demonstration
and
of
to
Wirecast.
an extent, there's an element to which people have expressed their personality online, and we think that's harmed for individuals. We think, importantly, the internet loses security for firms. They're less able to transfer important financial information. They're also, in terms for individuals in protest movements, they're less able to spread information and coordinate in order to bring about the good social outcomes that they want in their countries, no matter whether liberal or conservative. We think that that's a massive harm that they get on their side when these technologies spread. We think that that means that essentially when information as to technology used for hacking is transferred, then you get huge harms on their side. That's something that's only not allowed when hacking is not, when we take a strong principled stance against hacking and say that it is illegitimate no matter what it is being used for, no matter who is doing it. And so to that end, we oppose.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Ladies and gentlemen, the case we bring to an open government is based on three claims. Firstly, that this is information that needs to get out into the public domain. Secondly, it can't get out from other hands. And thirdly, hacking is the best possible channel for this information to give out anyway. My speech is going to be divided up into these three substantive points.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Firstly, I've got several points of extraneous rebuttal. So they stand up and they tell us that, oh, all this private information is going to be suddenly published on the internet. Like, firstly, we just don't think that always has to be the case, right? It's not inherently true. We think that often hackers are perfectly able to expose the means or the systems in which this information is taken up without actually giving out private information of individuals. It doesn't have to, that isn't a necessarily contingent argument. Secondly, they've made this massive connection between the things that hackers will be getting out of this company.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
And how this inherently equals property. Three responses to this. Firstly, that ignores all of Darrell's material about how often these bits of information are often acquired illegally anyway. The mechanisms which they are swept up by governments are often massively unknown by the individuals whose property this is in the first place, right? Given that it's taken illegally, we therefore don't see how it's true that it suddenly becomes the government's own personal property to the point at which they steal it, right? The kind of mechanisms we're talking about is the mass collection of data.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Right? We think that that's the kind of thing governments are able to do, and therefore we don't think that information is necessarily a property. Secondly, we just don't think it's always the case that even if it has been acquired illegally, right, that it shouldn't be in the hands of the public domain, right? For example, we're talking about here things that specifically with the government, information, for example, war crimes being carried out by the government. We think that even if the government has then acquired that kind of information perfectly legally, we still think this is the sort of thing that is public
demonstration
property.
of Wirecast.
Representing you, the point at which these acts are being carried out in the name of your country, right? We think this is the kind of thing that actually should be classed as public property property as opposed to the intellectual property of the government. Like third response to this is like property destruction, and like why then therefore all this hacking and destroying this property is really bad and like a bad form of protest. Like no, like what we often think we're talking about isn't like necessarily the destruction of this property, right? It's about like taking a website down for a couple of days. And what we think is actually analogous to, right, is for example protesters standing outside like Shell Oil, preventing Shell Oil bosses from going to work for a day, right? We don't think that's necessarily comparative with destroying their property. It's just destroying their means of making a living for one day. We think that's actually what like taking the website down is much more comparable to. Like thirdly, just note that they then talked about how it's really bad that all these like security flaws are being pointed out. Okay, the comparative is, if it isn't hackers that are pointing out the security flaws, it is the Chinese government, right, and the like cyber warfare they're perpetuating. We would much rather that hackers are actively pointing out the flaws in internet banking systems, which like is allowing people to view the bank accounts from other countries to view the bank accounts of like American citizens, right? We would much rather those flaws are pointed out right now, so the American government to actually act on dealing with it, and that is because the hackers actively make it known that this is being released. That's the crucial thing they miss. A Chinese government or any other kind of Russian government, for example, is not going to publish, aha, we have your bank details, right? It's just going to use them and perpetuate them for their own means. That's really harmful because the US then doesn't have the like capabilities to respond.
This is a demonstration of
Wirecast.
Wirecast.
Like make it known. We think that's actually really useful because what you get is a race to the more secure internet that they want to tell you is so important in opening opposition. That's when the US government can actually start to act to make those really effective changes. So like, given that that's like why this information needs to get out, because if it's not like the hackers that will be doing it, it's a foreign like government or power. Like secondly, like why can't it get out through other channels? Daryl told you that like generally told you about treatment of whistleblowers in the US
This
government.
is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Like, we think this is really harmful and they can't get out for like state information. When like you had these primary examples of people, for example, like Chelsea Manning being placed under suicide watch by the US government, being like forced to be in prison for the rest of his life. It is a massive deterrent for anyone within the US system, like in the US system, who sees that like that information they are going to be like potentially wanting to leak because they think it's a moral imperative to do so, because they now have this like hanging over them. Hackers don't have such a deterrent, right? For the reason that there's a much greiter level of anonymity.
This is a
right?
demonstration
like
of Wirecast.
Because they are not like directly stealing things from within the US system, right? They have a much better like level of technological knowledge than your average person within the US Army. That's really crucial because what that means is that it provides them a blanket cover, so it means they feel like they don't like have the same level of vulnerability that someone within the the US system actually would. Like secondly, like often these people who like may know things within the institutions are like directly embedded within institutions. Why does that's really problematic in terms of getting information out, right? Because what that means is that it's now like your colleagues are having to snitch on. It's now the people who work on a day-to-day basis. What that means is you become like normalised within these systems. You don't necessarily realise just how utterly abhorrent that is when on a day-to-day basis you're having to deal with that information. Like thirdly, note the way these institutions are organised is really problematic because what it means is that you only get to see, for example, Edward Snowden commented on this. A lot of his colleagues saw very small problems that were happening within the US and like within the NSA in terms of data management. What they saw was they saw like specific instances throughout their careers. They were never allowed to see the full picture. What that means is you're often allowed to put down to like one bad case example of one rogue person, right? Hackers specifically have the unique advantage of being able to get a full picture, right? The point at which you hack into a computer system of the NSA, for example, you are actually able to effectively not only have that thank you, like out of time, sorry. You're like getting much like better sense of like the broader perspective. So like, why is hacking the best possible channel? Like, firstly, just like their technological capabilities as hackers, right? These are people who've dedicated their entire lives to it. This is really crucial because what it means is you're less likely when they hack into these
demonstration of Wirecast.
They're less likely to get into the wrong hands because they have a much better capability in terms of security knowledge and in terms of keeping that information safe and out of the harm of like foreign governments, right? That someone, for example, who's working for the US government, like may significantly lack because they don't have the like encryption capabilities to keep it effectively on their like hard drive at home. That's really important. Like secondly, Secondly, that just means that they've dedicated their whole lives to doing it, right? These are people who effectively know the best possible methods of achieving this.
This is a
What that
demonstration
means, why
of
that's really crucial is it
Wirecast.
means all the problems they talk to us about keeping private property safe on their side of the house, it's actually made much better when hackers do it, because it means that it's no longer going to get into the hands of foreign governments, which we think is actually the real problem with this information being used for harmful reasons. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very proud to propose.
I'd like to thank that speaker and now call on the deputy leader.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Space where people communicate about fear and get their opinion across regardless of their size, regardless of whether they have the manpower to defend themselves against technological vigilantes. What this motion does is it shuts it down. It means the internet is only fair for those who know they're not saying something controversial or have the technological abilities to defend the controversial opinion they wish to collect. Two crucial points from the second opposition. Firstly, principally, why I think this is illegitimate, because as we recognise, there's something even proposition are only prepared to support in
This
some
is
cases.
a demonstration
Therefore,
of
it can't be a form
Wirecast.
of protest legitimate in all cases as a general method. Secondly, why we think this is a form of protest which shuts down the internet as a unique space and why that's so harmful. Before that, one specific response to what they gave us, which doesn't fit in to the general question. Look, people know about mass data collection. We don't understand what side proposition is talking about. We don't understand why they're hacking into Facebook to tell us the things we've already signed up to as the cost for using that service. We don't understand why they're hacking into the NSA to tell us the fact people's internet use is being monitored.
This is a
These are things with
demonstration
which the
of
vast majority
Wirecast.
people are comfortable. They accept as a price of using the internet or as a price to be secure in society. We think, therefore, what Proposition's model essentially again amounts to is groups of people making choices on behalf of the much broader population as a whole. Because I'm fine with Facebook knowing the fact that I really want to buy classic Doctor Who DVDs and advertising that to me and therefore gaining money from that. I don't regard that as intellectual theft. That's something I should be able to consent to, and no one else should be able to hack into that and make that choice for me on my behalf because they think it's morally right.
This
So in
is a
effect,
demonstration
it's about
of
privileging the moral
Wirecast.
opinions of the technologically savvy over everyone else who wants to use the internet and is happy to accept that as a price to doing so. We think people should be allowed to make that choice for themselves, and we support that agency on our side of the house. So firstly, in terms of our principles case, look, we noted that hacking was equivalent to two things. It's equivalent to the destruction of property. You destroy something which enormous amounts of money have been invested and which has value for that person. And it also destroys someone's ability to express themselves and have their voice. So you in effect prevent someone from having
This is
their
a
right to
demonstration
expression
of
on the
Wirecast.
internet. What we know is that something is only legitimate if it can be legitimate in cases you disagree with as well. As in, something isn't a legitimate means of dealing with the US government if you wouldn't also think it was legitimate for pro-life activists to use it as a campaign protest against Planned Parenthood. What we have to ask Proposition fundamentally, therefore, is would they be okay if pro-life activists hacked into Planned Parenthood and did a mass release of private information in the same way they think is acceptable for Facebook or they think is acceptable for Google? If they do, that fundamentally cripples the
This
ability of
is a
sensitive
demonstration
organisations
of
to exist,
Wirecast.
and it destroys people's right to any variety of privacy on the internet. Moreover, we think the information that I'm talking about is necessarily information which is released. Note, what they try and claim their case about, which is telling people that Facebook is monitoring them, is something they already know. To the extent they're doing something different, therefore, they must be releasing private information to damage these organisations, and that is the information they're talking about. Hackers are very poorly placed to decide what sort of information to release. Why?
This
because they have
is
no
a demonstration of
accountability
Wirecast.
whatsoever in the way that Facebook does or in the way that the government does, because the government or Facebook are held to account for, primarily by their customers or by their voters. What that means is that Julian Assange can decide to release the names of Afghan interpreters and put them in danger because he personally thinks they're morally wrong, regardless of whether the rest of society wants to protect them from threat. We think essentially hackers are poorly placed to decide which information is being released, and we shouldn't give them that power. Secondly, in terms of what the effects of this, no thanks, are. So the internet
This
contains
is a
enormous amount
demonstration
of
of Wirecast.
and that's a tendency which is increasing. What are the varieties of organisation which are most likely to be subject to attack? organisations with very controversial views, notably controversial NGOs, organisations like the NAACP, organisations like FEMEN, organisations like Planned Parenthood. Why specifically are those ones likely to be attacked? Frankly, because Facebook probably has about 2,000 people in its security because its business model depends on that, has huge amounts of money to invest in it. By contrast, small NGOs, organisations, or individuals which want to express
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Important service or space for discussion just don't have the money. So they tell us this isn't about power imbalances. Only those who are powerful have the ability to protect themselves online, and the government can do that in a way which a small underdog organisation championing a new opinion for a disadvantaged group just can't. What does this mean? It means these organisations either withdraw from the online space or are unable to effectively employ sensitive information in it. It is important that organisations wanting to express controversial views are in the online space. Why? Primarily
This is a
because
demonstration
it is the method
of
in which we currently
Wirecast.
share our information and the way that young people's minds today are being thought through their interactions online. What that means is that if new organisations which want to champion views can't be online, I'll take closing in just a minute, or can't be online effectively because they are constantly being hacked, they have a reduced ability to spread that information, and we see views being views being ossified. Go for it.
Does or should protests have to work within the confines of the law?
We think protests should have to work within the confines of the law, yes. Secondly, in terms, obviously that depends on what the law is.
This
if the law
is
made
a
by
demonstration
democratic
of
countries,
Wirecast.
yes. So in democratic countries, yes. Second, the second harm is the privacy of individuals. So the amount of sensitive information which are being shared are integral to the operation of these individuals. Dissident networks which want to work online require the fact that people participating in them know they're safe. Planned Parenthood requires the fact that those who are booking procedures online knows their information is safe. At the point where people have a high degree of fear about sharing their information with a controversial group or a controversial organisation, they don't have the ability to do that, and they don't have the ability to discuss online.
This is a demonstration of
In
Wirecast.
effect, this breaks the free online model whereby people can express their views and it can be used as a space for people to communicate sensitive information privately, which they have a unique inability to do by other means because they're too scared to go into a clinic or they're too scared to go into a forum. So it shuts down freedom of information, a way which is uniquely important to the internet, and people's freedom of expression, in a way they don't have any other space to express that opinion apart from the internet because they're too scared to do so. What does that mean? It means we're ruining what is fundamentally different about the internet. One of the responses we get to this, we're told that it's good if hackers
This is
expose
a
private
demonstration
information
of
to others the Chinese
Wirecast.
will get. Look, ultimately, I don't really care if the Chinese have my bank account. They're unlikely to try and steal £1,000 from me. However, it does matter if that's released to everyone on the internet, because that's the point at which I'm vulnerable to fraud, and that's the point at which my privacy has been violated. So that's the point at which the privacy systems on which the internet depends are broken. We're also told that because the information has been collected by people in the first place through theft, therefore it's legitimate. No, the majority of organisations are likely to be systematically hacked because they're vulnerable, don't collect information through theft, but rather people choosing to voluntarily
This is a
forward
demonstration
sensitive
of
discussion,
Wirecast.
or because they want to communicate with the organisation. That argument therefore doesn't stand. Very proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank our speaker and now moving to the back half of the debate, I'd like to call upon the member of government.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Panel, from back half, what we're going to tell you is that we want to promote a type of protest that gets the right attention from the right people in a way that is accessible to all groups, regardless of their
This
size,
is a demonstration
regardless of
of
their clout, regardless of the
Wirecast.
ability of governments to censor them. We recognise and are willing to concede that yes, some groups that people may have like reason to dislike may use this tactic too, but we recognise that there are often vastly marginalised groups who even need this access and need this power more. For those reasons, we're proud to stand in proposition. What are we going to bring you? In extension, we're going to talk to you about how this promotes truth and revelation, not only on a small level of things like individuals and corporations, but individuals and governments, essentially a completely new extension from back half. And then also,
This
what we're
is
going
a
to do
demonstration
is
of
we're going to explain to you
Wirecast.
simply that there is that what you need ultimately is a recognition of accountability and understanding that you can only get through this mechanism. That's what we're going to do. So So what happens under status quo? Under status quo, there are data holders who hold the balance of power in any negotiation between any group and a collection of other individuals. Be that, no, thank you, like a union and their corporations, be that a collection of individuals within a state and that state itself. Those data holders have an ability to set the parameters of that debate and set the parameters of what is potentially on the table.
This is a demonstration
That
of
is why, for example,
Wirecast.
workers' unions consistently extract less favourable deals than they otherwise would be able to, because they simply are unable to get that data in terms of what that company's profits are, or what that company's like layaway for wages are, or even like their boss's remuneration. Like, note that it's not a common practice for companies to have to reveal that data publicly. It's something they genuinely keep private to themselves because it gives them an advantage in the balance of power between those two groups. That leads ultimately to two problems. First of all, it means that those advocacy groups can't actually get the type of concessions that would otherwise be available to them.
This is a demonstration
So there
of
isn't an ability for there to be a
Wirecast.
fair compromise. The principle of this in action is the fact that during any court case, you have to provide information to the other side during the phase of discovery, because that allows for you to make a fair and compelling case as to what the parameters of the question are and what the consequence might ultimately be. This also applies, like I said, to states, but more importantly, there's an extra level that comes between me and a state. When I am a group that protests against a state for being sexist, discriminatory, corrupt, or many other things that a state doesn't do to represent me, I again
This
suffer from
is
that
a
information
demonstration of
asymmetry. More
Wirecast.
importantly, I suffer it in a way that is completely unsolvable for me as an individual. Why? Because I don't trust that state, because I think they have an incentive to lie to me, and because they've oppressed my people or oppressed my entire kin. I have no ability or no reason to trust them when they publish data in the first place. So when they publish figures saying that there are a lot of women higher than in the civil service, but I don't see it, I have no incentive to trust them. When they say we're not corrupt, I have no reason to trust them because I perceive them to be that. Hacking is valuable
This
because
is
it
a
gives you a way to
demonstration
access
of
data in a way that
Wirecast.
you know is verifiably true, because you acquired it from them and using their own servers in a way that you know they could not reasonably have tampered with. You get access to the data that they otherwise wouldn't have kept from you. What does that do in the long term? I think there are two broad incentives that arise in this. First of all, more data will simply be published because it leads to a less incentive for you to be hacked in the first place. There's going to be more accountability and more transparency from governments and corporations, which allows for fairer deals between the smallest people in your society and those power brokers at the top. But also what there is uniquely
This
is that
is a
there's an ability for
demonstration
that
of
data to be used
Wirecast.
in ways that are creatively new and perfect. The fact is, when you are able to use that data to challenge an area of the government that you otherwise would not have realised was a potential problem. So maybe you think, yes, I saw a lot of female employees in the social welfare office, but then I realised that the upper layers were still massively male dominated. I only can get that through the information, so it means I can move my protest onto areas where I can make some steps or some real tangible progress. I'll take front half now.
Regardless of whether you agree with the social aims of the
This
protest,
is a
it
demonstration of
methodologically legitimate
Wirecast.
for a pro-life group to hack Planned Parenthood and release personal information?
Okay, look, we are willing to take that hit if that happens. Unfortunately, yes, that is the principal debate we have to stand over. But note that under status quo, those groups still get to dominate public discourse. What happens now is a pro-choice group also gets to hack back and do the same and do damage back to that group and out them. So there is going to be a level of accountability that will exist under our side. Look, also note that the vast majority of hospital records aren't kept on computers. That is
This
the reason
is a
why
demonstration
Western
of
governments have massively
Wirecast.
said for years that electronic hospital records should be a thing. The actually vast majority are kept on paper for the very simple reasons of information security in the first place. You're not going to get a mass outing, but even if you were, we take that hit because we're willing to set up a ability for that data to come out and an ability for the two groups to compete. There's a broader stake here that goes to this, which is the fact that when those individuals have access to data, they control my ability to actively work with it. Okay, moving on. Why do I get the right attention from the right people?
This
Under
is a
status quo,
demonstration
existing
of
protests simply is
Wirecast.
ineffective for two reasons. One, the government controls the ability for me to vindicate my right to protest. If I do so sporadically, they call it a public disturbance and arrest me. If I go through the proper channels, they can shut it down and not grant me a protest licence because they decided that it was not their interest for my movement to voice their opinion in the first place. This is literally the most democratic way I can put my message across, but it's also the most direct way. Because under status quo, I have to protest in a way that shuts down city streets, that disadvantages my fellow citizens, that stops them living the life that they want to live. The people
This
who
is a
control the power that
demonstration
political
of
elites who sit in
Wirecast.
my parliament building or my presidential office and who aren't affected by it because their motorcade simply goes round. Their lives aren't changed tangibly by my protest. The citizens are merely disturbed, which is to, first of all, resentment against my group because how dare we shut down that city street in the first place. See the fact that student protests in Ireland were greeted with the same anger from middle class people because they couldn't shop on Nassau Street that day. But also, that leads to an important thing, that those marginalised groups simply don't get heard or don't get considered by large groups, and even then the majority distance
This
themselves
is a demonstration
from it.
of
Finally,
Wirecast.
protest is an incredibly risky thing to do for a couple of reasons. First of all, even if the government grants me a licence, they have and continue to use force to police that protest. They kettle protesters, they use water cannons on them, they have used batons and beat protesters. That is a fact of violence from the state. But even when the state doesn't attack me, I get attacked. If I stand at a pro-choice rally, I am likely to be photographed by an opposing side and that released online for them to harass me and dox me. That happens consistently to pro-choice advocates constantly. That would also happen a lot to advocates who
is a
exist in China
demonstration
or
of
spenders who exist in
Wirecast.
Saudi Arabia. We think those individuals have a right to a form of protest that their government can't catch them for. The important thing to recognise in this debate is, yes, there will be insidious actors who will victimise people with this data, but there are large amounts of people who live in nations that are thoroughly oppressive who need to have a way of protest that is democratic and open to them. This is one. For those reasons, we're proud to propose.
Let's thank that speaker and now call upon the member of opposition.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast. This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Today the government bench has overly understated the damage that hacking can have. What they want to do is they want to restore this balance between companies that have control over data with the people by burning down the houses and shops of both sides. We don't think that violence is the way to end this sort of imbalance. We don't think that this is a way to solve the problem. So in my speech I'm going to talk about a few things. First of all, I'm going to talk about the damages of hacking. I'm going to expand on what open opposition has told you a lot. And second of all, I'm going to talk about the damages of individuals
This
taking
is a
the security
demonstration
of their
of
own homes,
Wirecast.
about how this disproportionately concentrates power in the hands of very few people and why this is particularly damaging. Okay, so first of all, 2 points of rebuttal. First of all, in this response to this idea that somehow, these companies are plundering people by collecting their data, and therefore it is legitimate to hack these companies. So first of all, let's note that this is not actually equivalent to plunder, because people are asked for consent on lots of types of data, and they're giving this data in response to being offered lots of services for free because it costs a lot of money in order to
This is a
host and run these
demonstration of
companies. This is why,
Wirecast.
that's why you can, for example, read newspapers online for free and so on. We think that people do this with the knowledge that a lot of information is being taken. This is quite useful. But much more importantly, let's compare this to, let's take a comparison. So we have a system of capitalism, which is often plunder for people who have little access to capital, right? So what they're suggesting, analogously, is that because certain people hold a lot of power, we therefore are legitimate in burning down people's houses, in burning down people's shops, because these people have control
This
over
is
the
a
capitalist
demonstration
system,
of
and we
Wirecast.
And in order to offset this balance, right, we can destroy people's websites, we can destroy people's shops and take them down for a while, and that's okay. So we think that we need to recognize the extent of damage that government is advocating. Because, so what is hacking as protesting? So the difference between hacking as protesting and hacking as a use of weaponry is that under the side of the government, it will be more common, it will be endorsed. So, we often use, for example, military weapons such as guns to attack people who we think are terrorists and causing huge amounts of damage. But we don't use
This
it to
is a
attack
demonstration
people who
of
we disagree with
Wirecast.
in order to protest. So what we're saying in opposition is that yes, sometimes these tools are used by national governments. That's going to be done on both sides. But we're not happy with the average, just people using it as a form of protesting against different groups that they disagree with. That's why it's so harmful. Okay, moving on to the second point of rebuttal. This idea that the closing government wants people to have access to all sorts of data. I know there's a slight tension between the top and bottom halves here. But we think that the data, okay, 2 things. First of all, a lot of the data that they want access to that is currently private.
This
It's
is a
pri-
demonstration
it's not
of
public for a reason.
Wirecast.
I think it's a good thing that the US security and the US military does not publish all the information that they have on the security operations that they're conducting around the country, while like banks don't publish everyone's security details, like, because probably you don't want people to know all know like that a police operation is happening in a certain corner of the town, otherwise people who you're trying to prosecute would find out. But all the benefits that you talk about are hinged on the fact that we're going to discover this huge trove of information that will somehow help people make better policy. So we think that a lot of this information is already public in the
This
first place.
is a
There's,
demonstration
tons
of
reports you can
Wirecast.
find online about different parts of things happening in the government. Lots of data that the government is publishing more every single day. No, thank you, this data is being used for wonderful purposes. We don't think there's that much benefits in the hidden information that closing government claims that we will get through illegitimate and violent methods. Okay, so on to my substantive, 2 things. So first of all, what really is hacking and why can it really be so bad? So as someone who has worked with software, okay, so taking down a website for a few days is not as harmless as it
This
sounds.
is a
So they make it
demonstration
sound like
of
it's very
Wirecast.
complicated, but there are a few aspects to hacking that have been neglected in this debate. First of all, hacking is often a very irreversible option in the sense that if you take down or damage somebody's software database infrastructure, it often takes them, like an act that you might take 1 or 2 days to find by poking a hole into the security system, or a very small and vulnerable company that doesn't have many resources can often take down their site and damage it irreversibly for months, and they will not have the resources to be able to to control the impacts of this. But second of all, the impacts
This
of hacking
is
are
a
very, very
demonstration
difficult
of
to control, as
Wirecast.
opposed to having, if you have a peaceful protest, it's relatively easy to control the impacts of hacking. But with hacking, it's extremely risky because things can blow up very easily. If you try to tamper with the security system, and this is why we're a bit confused about them saying that hackers are very good with technology, therefore they'll be able to protect the information very safely. That's clearly not true because there are other hackers who can try to get this information from the hackers who took the information in the first place. So this information is definitely not safe. No, thank you. But the problem with this is that even if you have the intention
This is
of
a
only
demonstration
collecting
of
certain amounts of
Wirecast.
information and keeping it very safe, even if you have the intention of only taking down their website and not taking all this information, it is very likely that you will accidentally alter a certain line in the code or insert something that does something unexpected to a website. And because of this, it's very difficult to control what exactly you do. I'll take you in this. No, thank you. It's very hard to control exactly what you do and what sorts of damage you do to a website. That's extremely damaging. Okay, and quick rebuffs on this idea of defense. This is not going to better security in
This
countries.
is a
There are lots
demonstration
of
of
white hat hackers
Wirecast.
who do hacking for a good cause. That's completely separate from this. Okay, but very importantly, why is it bad that individuals are taking national security into their own hands? And this is particularly impactful because of how uncontrollable and how damaging hacking can be. So the problem is that the power is concentrated in the hands of very, very few, people. Very, very few people, because you only need 1 or 2 really good hackers in order to cause a huge amount of damage. This is why we bring
This is a demonstration of
what we
Wirecast.
bring the unique thing, right, is that the power is concentrated in the hands of very few people. These people often belong to groups that are quite frankly, so take a look at Anonymous, for example. They're extremely misogynistic, right? We don't want people who, we don't want this sort of power concentrated in the hands of very few people who quite often belong to, groups of, I'm trying not to sound discriminatory, but groups of people in society that have certain types of views. And it's extremely damaging and comparable
This
to
is
having
a demonstration
dictatorship
of
a
Wirecast.
few people that belong to a certain sector of society, and it's very likely that it will be contained within a certain sector of society because these people, hacking is not a casual thing, right? If you have to learn to be a very good hacker, you pretty much have to sit in your home and hack every single day, 24/7, for at least 10 years, and then maybe you might be a little bit good at it and you might be able to break some systems. But we think that this sort of lifestyle is restricted to a very small group of people who can actually hack systems very, very well. So we think that if we concentrate all this power in the hands of very few people, this is much worse than the current situation where we have when economic
This
power
is a
concentrated in the
demonstration
hands
of
some
Wirecast.
people, because at least with money you can do something, but then it's very difficult to get into this very small group. And because of these problems that we've raised, because hacking is horrifically damaging, we don't want to give power to a few people. Very proud to us.
I'd like to thank our speaker for the most tactful description of neckbeards I've ever heard. And now call upon the government whip to close out the case for opposition.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
I love looking at my face when I speak. Ready?
This
Anna, let's
is
see
a
if my voice can
demonstration
last
of
7 minutes.
Wirecast.
Okay, I'm going to talk to you about two things. Fighting for a cause and the truth, and why this is not only the best way we think in closing proposition to do that, but in a lot of situations, the only way to be able to do that, and why we think it is legitimate and fair of people to want to do that. And second of all, I'm going to talk to you about trust and change, and the fact that it is a legitimate way of gaining trust and gaining change in a lot of systems where people can't do that. No, timeless extension went largely unresponded to, so I'm going to remind you of it if it wants to respond.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Fighting for a cause and the truth. So often when people protest, it's because they fundamentally disagree with something, that they're so worried about something happening, like the idea of corruption happening, that they protest against an idea of corruption, right? So those are the two reasons that people will protest, right? Opening opposition say that there are other means to challenge these systems, and that you don't need to engage in this form of protest. 3 responses to this. First of all, on other means to challenge. Like often
is a
the means that they bring
demonstration
you
of
are like state
Wirecast.
controlled or like elite controlled. So like you going to the courts or you like whatever are controlled by the state. Often the thing people want to protest the most are things that the state already agrees with. For example, capitalism, pro-life ideas, the armed forces, all propagated by states and by these businesses. The means in which opposition want you to fight them are controlled by those people. We don't think people should protest their oppressors by working with their oppressors. Like, it is fundamentally ridiculous for them to stand up and say, if I disagree with something that the state is doing, I should go to that state to stop them doing it. Like, we don't think that it's fair. We think that this is a way that I can gain some sort of control and some sort of power over a state who literally controls everything in my life. No. So funny. They compare this to property rights. A lot of people don't agree with property rights. Who are they supposed to go to challenge this? Like, going to the local court that tells you it's illegal and what you're doing isn't going to get them any outcomes. However, hacking into the government and having some sort of leverage, having some sort of control over that government, even if it is, I'm going to be a whistleblower unless you do something I want you to do, is that some control that opinion can be represented. We say this is massively important in situations where the government has no reason to listen to you. Like, often capitalist governments have no reason to listen to people with like opinions that aren't capitalist, right? Second thing on this, the discussion I want you to have on the internet as an alternative doesn't garner me any change or garner me any recognition. So note that like Facebook likes aren't equivalent to policy change or power or control. The government doesn't have to listen to any of that. No, when I can hack into their system and like they can know that someone is like within their like inner circle, they have to listen to me a little bit more than if I get 1,000 likes from the Irish debating community, right? Finally on this, they say that they compare it to property rights. Like, property rights are controlled by elites and are used to oppress people. We think it is legitimate to protest that when the government fails to even listen to you or even engage in a debate with you. Note, so we do think it is legitimate for you to burn down a lot of houses and steal a lot of money to give you no reason other than, well, we don't let people do that with property rights, so we won't let them do it with this. Not analysis, right? We say that similarly in this situation, when a state owns statistics on you, secrets about you, is able to use those secrets to maintain your subjugation, you are legitimate in attacking it, and we are willing to support you using this means to attack it. Finally on this point,
this is a demonstration of Wirecast.
This is a way for protesters to gain some sort of transparency and some sort of truth. This is the only form of protest in which you actually get some sort of feedback on your protest, right? So you can know that when you hack in, like you thought the government was a bit sexist, you now have proof that they're a bit sexist. You legitimize your protest. You make it a lot more serious and a lot more difficult for them to take it down. Because the government can't turn around and be like, well, actually, we're really nice to women all the time. Because you literally have the proof now to be taken seriously and to be listened to. No, thank you. It's no longer just that you feel subjugated, but you have proof that you are subjugated, and that is massively important. This is important. Why? Because it actually helps you challenge those structures. It also, does it in a way that a march can't do, in a way that a charity cannot do. You walking down O'Connell Street and saying that you disagree with the government gets you far, far less attention, makes you seem like less of a threat, makes them be able to paint you as a crazy. You having specific information of how their structures work to oppress your group gives you legitimacy, garners you an attention. We're not going to stand here and say that we're going to live in a feminist, communist utopia, but we are going to say that those views now have a formal legitimacy. Seeing as they are legitimate views that deserve the right to protest, we would rather they have an effective form of protest rather than Facebook likes and shouting on O'Connell Street. Closing.
So what do you think are the harms of living in a society that endorses burning down buildings to protest property rights?
Okay, one, not a motion of endorsing doing it, saying
This
it
is a
legitimate
demonstration
form
of
protest.
Wirecast.
But two, we say that the harm you're talking about is a harm to an elite that is happy to live in a world that is created. I think a lot of feminists and a lot of communist people might be quite happy to put up with that pain for a little while, to get some recognition for their opinion and some recognition for their cause in a time where the state literally does not listen to them. But more on that in a second. Second point now. They say that we need to support standing over an idea that we don't agree with. Note, this whole speech is me standing over ideas I don't agree with. Right. The idea that supporting hacking of people we don't like. Three things on this. One, we believe it is legitimate to protest your oppression, and the idea gain recognition for the fact that you feel you are oppressed, no matter what your opinion, even if I don't like it. Right. Two, we say that there is a balancing act, capitalist people can do this, anyone can do this. We think there can be a balancing act. Three, leader of opposition likes charities and likes other forms of protest. We say that they are fundamentally the same goal, apart from we can prove that our goal actually works. They just can prove that charities can be shot on Facebook about it, right? We say that the difference is the fact that there is safety for the people engaging in these protests and efficiency. Finally, on this speech. The last speaker gave us, as the chair said, a nice description of neckbeards, right? The problem of that is, right, that speech is indicative of the fact that there are some views we don't accept in our society, that there are some views we don't listen to in our society. It is not enough for opposition to stand up and say, we like democracy and we like nice societies as long as you fit into it. We like people who stand outside the norm. We beg you to propose.
I'd like to thank that speaker and now call upon the opposition whip to close out the debate as a whole.
Sorry, thanks.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast. This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
The unique piece of framing that Jess gave is to point out that protest is about communication. It is not about justice, it is not about vigilantism, it is not about trying to enact a policy that someone else wouldn't do. It's about trying to persuade other people that they should take other means in order to make the policy you want come about. Good ideas can persuade people in a democracy to change votes through the democratic system, to write articles, to change ideas. bad ideas need to
This
throw
is a
petty
demonstration of
straws
Wirecast.
online that like ruin people's lives. That is what just brought you an extension that has gone unresponded to. So I'm going to sum this debate in two quite predictable areas. Firstly, are hackers legitimate actors as protesters? And two, does hacking have good consequences? But like, firstly, quite a lot of extraneous rebuttal. Okay, so onto the extension that we just heard. As far as I can make out, what it is that CG want is they want nice civil society groups to hack the government to find out all the information that the government is hiding from us about how sexist our society is. One,
This is a demonstration of
as compared to the
Wirecast.
information that OG was talking about, does exist in the public sphere. Two, tell me the last time the Cabinet Office for Inequalities was hacked. They make policy information for it to be released. And three, even if this were the case, we think the government would just stop commissioning reports about sexism in the country, and then nobody would know, and this would be bad. But crucially, like, there always just will be information asymmetry between some people and other people. There will always be things that I don't know, that you don't know, that the government knows about me that it doesn't know about you. I think that's a good thing, personally, right?
This
but
is
like,
a demonstration
to be clear,
of
what OG want is
Wirecast.
for no one to know anything, and what CG want is for everyone to know everything about everyone all the time. We think this was a tension that they had to clear up on their bench. Secondly, this idea that governments control all other forms of protest. Like, the truth is that we have free speech in democracy. You can write an article, right? If people don't read your article, if you feel that you are like outside the mainstream, as Lucy wanted to end her speech on, that's probably because your material isn't, like, your arguments aren't very persuasive to other people in the world, right? Like, that is not something which legitimizes you to go and release information about people's
This
like
is a
access to
demonstration
sensitive
of
services,
Wirecast.
or like the fact that they run a cheating website on the internet. We think, right, like, their best mechanism for change is getting attention, and because they couldn't prove on either side of the gov bench that these hackers were going to actually break down the government and start the world afresh. Like, their best mechanism for change is to get people to like see that this is a bad thing, and to like lobby their governments to change them. But crucially, people don't care, as Jackie told you. Okay, to clear up this thing about property rights, no thanks, right? Like, look, yes, some people disagree that property rights should exist. I am somewhat ambivalent
This is
about
a
property
demonstration
rights. But
of
crucially, if you don't
Wirecast.
think that property rights should exist, you should campaign to be a socialist in an election, right? You should try and change people's minds. The government is just literally not stopping you writing that in a newspaper, right? But the reason we don't let people burn down houses, Lucy, is because it has the wrong victims. You're not protesting against the capitalist system. You're just literally burning down somebody's house and ruining all their stuff. Like, I live in a house. I am not the capitalist oppressors. I just live in a house. Please don't burn it down. Okay.
This is a demonstration of
OG can talk
Wirecast.
about like governments having bad information. So what I'm going to come on, this is what I'm going to come on to about like, are hackers legitimate actors? Right. Okay. So OG, I can't. Okay. So I'm gonna right. Are hackers legitimate actors as protesters? Like, the people we're comparing them here to are the big corporations or to the governments that they're hacking. Right? Do we basically think that Anonymous, Neckbeard Anonymous, is more or less legitimate than the democratically elected government of the United States? We don't have to all do
This
any
is a
We don't have to
demonstration
say
of
that governments, like,
Wirecast.
are always completely fair with their information, but for them to take all the risks of normalising hacking as a protest and of having these kind of mechanisms distributed online, we say they have to prove some of the change that they want, right? For this to be legitimate, it has to be the best way to change people's minds, given all the harms that Jess told you and went unresponded to, right? They don't actually prove any change to these structures. The best they can do is say that whistleblowing is unlikely. Like, we think, to be honest, whistleblowing probably is unlikely. So is super ethical hacking, for all the reasons I'm going to come on to, right? This is not a comparative that was entirely fair. Okay, so does hacking have good
This is a
consequences?
demonstration
Because
of
basically,
Wirecast.
CG is happy, as they concede, with taking hits against the most vulnerable, against people, against minorities, taking services which are legally protected, but would nonetheless have major social consequences. For example, accessing like LGBT information sites, or changing your name online if you come out as trans, or if you are a domestic abuse survivor, or accessing abortion information online, right? They say they're willing to take this hit, the biggest harm in the debate, in exchange for what, essentially? For like irritating elites to no effect, right? As far as I can make out. So how does this one break
This is a
down?
demonstration
Who is
of
hacking? And why
Wirecast.
this is not, as they say, a balancing act between the powerful, between like different groups who think different things, right? Why it isn't democratic to have hacking be normalised in the same way that it's democratic to have like newspapers be normalised, right? It's because hackers are random vigilantes with one idea of justice, with a hugely disproportionate amount of power. Jess tells you this when she says that like these groups are extremely, extremely obsessive, strange men for the most part, right? That's what they are. She was tactful. I'm not interested. Sorry. So like, why isn't it a balancing act? Because lots of people can
This
write.
is a
Communists
demonstration
can write,
of
capitalists can write,
Wirecast.
whatever. They all have equal access to like being able to write blogs on the internet. I don't have the ability to rip down the website of the Tea Party if I wanted to, or of like the National Front or of anyone else. But I know that there are people who have the ability, I'll take this out opening, I know that there are people who have the ability to like take down people's access to the British Pregnancy Advice Service, as happened last year. Like when it's true that these groups are, like when the overlap between the anonymous forums and the MRA forums is like almost 80%ish, right? It's just clear that this is not a balancing act. Yes.
If hackers
This
don't
is a
expose
demonstration
security
of
flaws in banking systems,
Wirecast.
aren't foreign warfares just going to do it anyway?
Okay, fine, right. I don't know why, like, foreign... Okay, two things. Like, one, it's saying we will expose problems by having big problems in which people's data is leaked. I think it's not a plus. But two, you didn't actually tell me why, like, random, anonymous, evil people are, like, actually worse. They are equally unaccountable. They are equally... Like, I think that they're more likely to want my money than, like, someone on the other side of the world. I don't have very much money. Okay, two, who gets hacked, right? Please don't burn down my house. One, it's small groups with weak systems, right?
This
it's like, it's
is a
not
demonstration
actually
of
massive corporations that get
Wirecast.
hacked very often. Like, I can think of Sony, and that's actually about it. It's mostly groups that have a weaker system because they don't have the money to protect themselves. They don't have the firewalls. So I just told you all the long-term consequences, which these small, illegitimate, unelected vigilante groups can't protect, as compared to, for example, the consequences of like me going out with a megaphone in the street, right? The consequences are huge, but they are like hugely directed against groups which are one, controversial, people loosely want to protect, and two, poor and weak, right? Because they can't set up these huge firewall systems. What happens then, right? What happens then? This is what
This
we
is a demonstration of Wirecast.
like, big corporations and governments can better protect themselves against the hacking methods that get seen against these smaller groups. But the small groups are still at risk, right? So you actually lose all the accountability you get on OG as soon as they respond to these hacks and as soon as they are able to securitize their systems and to shut them down. But it shuts out the smaller groups, makes the internet a less safe space for the marginal, and essentially this is an illegitimate form of consequences, a form of protest that has bad consequences. I'm proud to oppose.
Demonstration of Wirecast.
Next debate, I think,